Throw her out. 2 words. That was all it took. The ballroom fell silent. Crystal chandeliers threw golden light across hundreds of frozen faces. Champagne glasses stopped moving. Conversations died. And every single eye in that room turned to the same place, to Lorraine, standing behind her cleaning cart, holding a damp cloth in her hands, wearing the same Navy maintenance uniform she had worn to every shift for the past 3 years. Rosalind Madison's finger was still pointed at her, and somewhere behind them both, unseen, unannounced, already watching from the entrance of the most important room in New York, was Kwon Ho-jun. He had been watching for a while. Rosalind Madison thought a uniform was a verdict. She thought the woman behind that cart was invisible, disposable, beneath notice, and she made sure the entire room agreed with her. This channel exists for every woman who has ever been pointed at like that. If you are not on Rosalind's side, subscribe right now, hit the notification bell, and drop your name in the comments below so we know you are here. The thing about invisibility is that you have to practice it. Lorraine had been practicing for 3 years. She had it down to a science by now, the exact angle to push the cart so the wheels didn't squeak against marble, the precise moment to step aside when guests approached, so fluid and automatic that most people processed her as furniture rather than a person, the particular rhythm of wiping down a surface so that by the time someone looked up, she was already gone. It was a skill, a real one. Lorraine Kwon, though nobody in any of these hotels knew her by that name, had learned early in life that skill was something people could never fully take from you, even when they took everything else. She was 34 years old. She had grown up in Baltimore, the second daughter of a woman who worked hospital laundry and a father who fixed elevators for a living. Her childhood home smelled like starch and machine oil. Her mother's hands were perpetually dry. Her father whistled when he worked, old soul songs mostly, the kind of music that understood that hard work and dignity were not opposites. Lorraine had absorbed both of them without trying. She was not a woman who complained. She was not a woman who wore her difficulties on the outside. The people who moved through these luxury hotels and corporate towers, the ones who handed her a dirty glass without looking up, who stepped around her cart like it was a tree stump, who spoke loudly and intimately in her presence because they had decided she didn't register. Those people would have been startled to know how precisely Lorraine was observing all of them. She saw everything. The executive on the 14th floor who screamed at his assistant every morning and then gave her a single expensive coffee as if that settled the account. The socialite who tipped servers at public events and left the private catering staff with nothing. The kind ones, and there were kind ones, who said, "Good morning," like they meant it, who held elevator doors without calculation. Lorraine catalogued all of it, not bitterly, just honestly. She had chosen this. That was the part that would have genuinely surprised most people in her life if they had known. This job, this specific job, cleaning luxury venues and high-end hotels in Manhattan, was a choice, a deliberate, carefully considered choice that she had made 6 years ago and had never once regretted. The story of why began, as most important stories do, with a man. Not the kind of man people wrote about in magazines. Not yet. When Lorraine met Kwon Ho-jun, he was 29 years old and running a technology startup out of a sublease office in Koreatown with 3 employees and a second-hand coffee machine that leaked. His English was strong but careful. He chose each word like he was still cross-referencing it against an internal standard. He worked 18-hour days. He ate the same 3 meals on rotation because he didn't have the bandwidth to think about food. He was polite to everyone and intimidating to most of them without meaning to be. Lorraine had met him at a community grant workshop hosted by a Brooklyn nonprofit. She was there because she had been volunteering as a financial literacy mentor. He was there because his startup had applied for a small business development grant, and he needed a human being to review his English language application materials. She had looked at his application for 12 minutes, then she had looked at him. "This is technically accurate," she said, "but it sounds like a manual, not like a company someone would want to invest in." He had stared at her. Not offended. Calculating. "Show me what you mean," he said. She rewrote 2 paragraphs on the spot, on a legal pad, with a pen she'd borrowed from the front desk. She didn't soften anything. She just made it honest in a way that was also compelling. He read it again. "How much do you charge?" he asked. "I don't. I volunteer here on Tuesdays." Something shifted in his expression. It was not gratitude exactly. It was recognition. They had talked for 4 more hours. 6 months later, he had come back to find her. Not because the grant had come through, though it had, because he said He had spent 6 months working alongside consultants and investors and advisors who all told him what he wanted to hear, and he had realized somewhere around month 4 that what he actually needed was someone who would not. She became his sounding board, his translator, not of language but of meaning, of nuance, of the gap between what he intended to communicate and what American business culture was actually receiving. She challenged him constantly. He challenged her back with equal precision. The respect between them was immediate and absolute, which was perhaps why neither of them noticed for a long time that something else was also developing. Ho-jun's company grew. Slowly at first, then in the sudden lurching way that technology companies sometimes do. A single right pivot, a right partnership, a product that solved a problem nobody had named yet, but everyone immediately recognized. By the time Lorraine was 30, Guan Technology Solutions had offices in Seoul, San Francisco, and Singapore. By the time they married, quietly, in a courthouse in Lower Manhattan with 2 witnesses and no photographer, Ho-jun was one of the 50 wealthiest men in Asia, and Lorraine had walked out of the ceremony and gone to work the next morning. Not because she didn't love him. She loved him with the same quiet precision she brought to everything in her life, because she had seen what public life did to people. She had watched it happen to women especially, the ones who married powerful men and were immediately sorted into a category, a role, a presentation. Photographed, analyzed, commented on, reduced to the accessories or the adversaries of their husbands' public narratives. She had watched genuinely intelligent women become objects in their own stories. She would not do it. Ho-jun had understood. He always understood when she explained things to him clearly, and she always explained things to him clearly. It was one of the foundational terms of their entire relationship. "I want to stay invisible," she had said. "In what way?" he asked. "All the public ways." He had been quiet for a moment. Then, "And in the private ways?" "In the private ways," she said. "I want to be the only thing you see." He had never argued, so she remained invisible. No social media, no public appearances at his events, no interviews, no profiles, no photographs. The staff at Guan Technology's global offices knew their CEO had a wife, but only his most trusted inner circle, his personal assistant, Ethel Weber, and 2 others, knew her name or her face. She took cleaning work 3 years ago because she was restless, and because she respected work done with her hands, and because she had always found thinking easier when her body was moving. She did not need the money. She needed the rhythm, the discipline, the particular honesty of a job that showed results in real time. The floor was dirty, and then it wasn't, and that was a form of satisfaction that no boardroom had ever given her. Tonight she was working the Madison Global Charity Gala. She had looked up the guest list before her shift, as she always did. It was a habit she'd developed. Knowing who would be in a space made her more efficient. She saw Ho-jun's name on the confirmed attendee list. She had texted him. "You didn't mention the gala," he had responded. "I try to keep my work separate from my wife." She had sent back a single period. Their private punctuation for, "I see you, and I'm not impressed by you right now, but I love you anyway." He had sent back a smiley face. She had laughed in the locker room by herself and then gone to work. The hotel staff had a name for it. They called it weather. "Bad weather today," a server named Deja whispered to Lorraine around 4 in the afternoon, 3 hours before the gala was set to begin. Lorraine looked up from the section of corridor she was polishing. Deja was 22 and had been working catering events in Manhattan since she was 19. She had the specific facial expression of someone who had learned to assess danger quickly. A slight tightness around the eyes, a carefully neutral mouth. "Who?" Lorraine asked. "The woman running this event. Madison." "Rosalind Madison?" Deja nodded. Her gaze moved sideways before she spoke again, which told Lorraine that what came next was something the young woman had been told not to repeat. "She made Terence cry," Deja said. "Terence. The man has been managing hotel events for 11 years, and she made him cry in a hallway because the centerpiece lilies were the wrong shade of white." Lorraine looked at her. "What's the right shade of white?" Apparently, whatever shade, they were not. Lorraine went back to her work, but she kept her ears open. Over the next 2 hours, the picture assembled itself piece by piece in the way that only happens when you are invisible enough that people forget to censor what they say around you. The woman who managed floral arrangements had been reduced to tearful apology, twice in one afternoon, once for the lilies, once because a table runner was a 1/4 inch off center. A junior event coordinator had been told, loudly and in front of other staff, that her shoes were unprofessional and that she was reflecting poorly on the event. The coordinator was wearing the shoes specified by the hotel uniform policy. A young man named Chen, who operated the lighting board, had been pulled aside and informed that his professional credentials were somehow insufficient for this particular event, despite the fact that he had run lighting for 3 galas at this same hotel in the past 6 months without incident. And Terence. Lorraine saw Terence once that afternoon, in the kitchen corridor. He was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, with the calm, practiced efficiency of someone who had managed thousands of events over a long career. He was standing very still against the wall, looking at nothing, pressing the heel of his hand against his sternum the way people do when they're trying to settle something internal. He caught her looking. He gave a small, controlled smile. "Big night," he said. "Big night," she agreed. He straightened up, cleared his throat, and went back to work. Lorraine went back to hers. She understood, in the abstract, that there were people in the world who were cruel. She had understood it since she was young. What she had never fully understood, what continued to surprise her even now, even after years of moving through the highest echelons of power and the most anonymous corners of working life, was the particular quality of cruelty that was performed. The cruelty that needed an audience, that wasn't released under pressure but was constructed, targeted, aimed. Rosalind Madison, from everything Lorraine had gathered, was that second kind. She saw her for the first time at 6:15. The gala was due to begin at 7. The ballroom was close to ready. Lorraine had spent the past hour on the main floor, moving methodically through the sections assigned to her team, checking corners and baseboards, and the particular stretch of marble near the east entrance that always caught scuffs during setup. Rosalind Madison swept through the ballroom at 6:15 with the focused energy of someone who was performing competence rather than practicing it. She was striking. Lorraine acknowledged it without comment. Blonde, sharp-featured, dressed in a floor-length navy gown that had probably cost more than some of the staff's monthly rent. The jewelry at her neck was real and serious. She carried herself with the particular posture of a woman who had decided a long time ago that she was the most important person in every room she entered, and had practiced that posture until it was structural. She swept the room with her eyes the way generals swept maps, and then she turned to Terence and began telling him everything that was wrong. Her voice was not a yell. That was the thing Lorraine noticed most. Rosalind Madison didn't yell. She spoke at a perfectly controlled, perfectly audible volume, loud enough to be overheard, quiet enough to maintain plausible deniability. Every sentence was a blade delivered with a surgical instrument. Lorraine watched the color leave Terence's face in real time. She turned back to her cart and finished the east entrance section. By 7:15, the ballroom was full, and Gwon Ho-jun had not yet arrived. Lorraine has been in this room for hours. She's seen everything. She's heard everything. She knows exactly what kind of woman Rosalind Madison is, and she hasn't said a single word. Here is the question I want you to drop in the comments right now. If you were Lorraine and you knew your husband was about to walk through that door, would you warn him first, or would you let the night unfold exactly as it's going to? Subscribe and hit the bell right now, because here is where the wine spills, the microphone comes out, and Rosalind Madison makes the biggest mistake of her entire career. Don't you dare click away. The wine didn't even touch anyone important. That was what Lorraine would think about later, in the quieter hours after everything had happened. The thing that detonated a woman's entire empire started with a spilled glass of red wine that landed on a marble floor and absolutely nothing else. No damaged dress, no stained suit, no guest embarrassed, just wine on marble, cleanable in 40 seconds. The accident happened at 8:23. Lorraine noted the time automatically. She had always been precise about time, a habit she'd inherited from her father, who said that the only thing you could give someone that you could never take back was the minutes you made them wait. A guest near the east side of the ballroom, a heavy-set man in a tuxedo, animated in conversation, gesturing with his wine glass, had bumped the edge of Lorraine's cleaning cart as he turned. The glass slipped. The wine fell. A long, dark arc of it across the pale marble, pooling around the base of a decorative pillar. The man looked down, then at Lorraine. "Oh, sorry about that," he said, with the mildly embarrassed tone of a person who recognized a small accident and was prepared to move past it. "Not a problem," Lorraine said. "I've got it." She was already reaching for the towel. She had done this hundreds of times. The motion was automatic. Towel down, blot, not wipe. Check for spread. Secondary cloth for the residue. Done. 40 seconds from start to finish, 50 if the marble had been freshly waxed and needed care. She was perhaps 15 seconds into the process when she became aware of footsteps, purposeful ones. The kind that clear a path not because the walker is moving fast, but because the walker has decided the path belongs to them. She didn't look up immediately. She finished blotting the leading edge of the spill first, because she was professional, and because she genuinely had not yet understood what was coming. When she did look up, Rosalind Madison was 3 feet away. Up close, she was even sharper than she'd looked from a distance. The jewelry was exceptional, a diamond tennis necklace that sat at her collarbone like something from a museum. Her eyes were a pale grey-green, and they were not warm. They had the quality of light bouncing off something with no interior temperature, reflective but revealing nothing. She was looking at Lorraine the way Lorraine had seen certain people look at things they were about to throw away. "This," Rosalind said, "is exactly why I specified experienced staff," her voice carried. The room near them had already begun to quiet. People sensed Rosalind's attention the way birds sensed a change in barometric pressure. Lorraine finished blotting the primary spill. She kept her hands moving. "I apologize for the disruption," she said. "I'll have this cleared in a moment." "A moment." Rosalind repeated the word with a specific intonation that made it sound like evidence of something. Lorraine looked up at her, calmly. She didn't smile, didn't shrink, didn't perform apology beyond what was actually warranted. The wine had spilled because a guest bumped a cart. She had been doing her job. The math of the situation was simple, but Rosalind wasn't doing math. She was doing something else. "Do you know what this event is?" Rosalind said. "A charity gala," Lorraine said. "A charity gala," Rosalind repeated, and now the volume was climbing. Not dramatically, not yet, but enough. Enough that the guests nearest them had stopped even the pretense of their own conversations. "That has taken 6 months to plan. 6 months. And you can't manage a cleaning cart without causing an incident." "The wine didn't touch any guests," Lorraine said. It was the wrong thing to say. Not because it was inaccurate. It was completely accurate. But Rosalind's eyes sharpened in a way that told Lorraine she had just made the mistake of defending herself, which Rosalind had apparently decided was a personal offense. "I'm sorry," Rosalind said. Lorraine looked at her. She understood what was happening now. She had enough experience with this particular type of person to read the architecture of it clearly. This was not about the wine. The wine was a door that had been opened, and Rosalind Madison intended to walk through it to somewhere else. Somewhere she had perhaps been wanting to go since she'd first seen Lorraine's cart in the ballroom earlier that evening. Lorraine said nothing more, which was, it turned out, also the wrong choice. Rosalind seemed to interpret the silence as submission. Her posture shifted, almost imperceptibly, but Lorraine caught it. The slight elevation of the chin, the small expansion of the chest. "People like you," Rosalind said, "are why I asked for experienced staff specifically." The phrase landed in the now very quiet section of the ballroom. People like you. Lorraine heard someone, somewhere in the semicircle of watching guests, draw a sharp, small breath. She set down the secondary cloth. She straightened up fully, which brought her to eye level with Rosalind, and she kept her expression exactly where it was. Calm, steady. The face of a woman who was declining to perform shock because she had long since stopped being shocked by the ways people chose to show themselves. "I'll have this finished and be out of your way," Lorraine said. She reached for the cleaning solution. Rosalind took a half step back, and for one moment Lorraine thought it was over. Then Rosalind turned to the room, and someone handed her a microphone. The silence in the ballroom was the specific silence of several hundred people deciding, simultaneously, to become very still. Rosalind held the microphone at a slight angle, the way people do when they are accustomed to being heard but want the gesture to look casual. Her eyes swept the room once, a conductor checking that the orchestra was in position, and then settled back on Lorraine. "I want everyone to see this," Rosalind said. Her voice through the speakers was precise, controlled, practiced. She had done this before, not this exactly, but something in the same family. Public correction, public diminishment. Because this is a perfect example of why standards matter. The room did not move. Lorraine did not move. She had both hands at her sides. The cleaning cloth was still in her left hand. She was aware of every person in her peripheral vision. The server near the east wall who had gone pale, the man who had spilled the wine who was staring at the floor, Deja somewhere behind her to the left who she could hear breathing. She chose very deliberately to look at Rosalind. Not defiantly, not with anger, just directly. with the fullness of her attention. It was, in her experience, the thing that unsettled this type of person the most. This, Rosalind continued, gesturing at Lorraine the way you'd gesture at a problem on a whiteboard, is why I specifically requested that cleaning staff remain out of the primary guest areas during the event. This is why I put those protocols in place, and instead, she let the pause land, this is what we get. A nervous, compliance-shaped laugh moved through part of the crowd. Lorraine noted it, filed it. You don't belong here, Rosalind said, simply, clearly, as though stating a geographic fact. The laugh stopped. Even the people who had laughed seemed to realize, a half-second too late, that the room had just gone somewhere they hadn't agreed to follow. Rosalind looked at the security personnel near the edge of the room. I want her removed. One of the guards, a tall man in a dark jacket, began moving toward Lorraine from the east side. And remove that cart. I don't want to look at it. The second guard started moving from the other direction. Lorraine watched them come. She thought about Ho-jun. She thought, specifically, about something he had said to her once during a particularly difficult period in the early days of his company, when a larger competitor had publicly undermined him in the press, and he had sat in their small Brooklyn apartment and said, very quietly, "They think silence is agreement. Let them." She thought about that. She kept her hands still. The guards were perhaps 8 feet away when the voice came from the entrance. That won't be necessary. The voice was not loud. It didn't need to be. There was something in the timbre of it, a particular quality of composed authority that did not require volume to carry weight. It moved through the room the way a stone moves through still water. Everything else simply stopped. And then the room turned. All of it. Every head, every body, every borrowed attention. Toward the entrance of the ballroom, where Kwon Ho-jun stood. He was in a black tuxedo with a white shirt and no tie, the deliberate, understated style of a man who had decided he would never again wear anything that felt like a costume. He was 41 years old, lean and straight-backed, with the particular stillness of someone who had trained themselves out of all unnecessary motion. His face was composed into its default setting, not blank, but contained, every feature deliberate. Beside him, one step back and to his left, was Ethel Weber. Ethel was 57, Korean-American, and had been his personal assistant for 14 years. She was currently in a charcoal pantsuit with a tablet in one hand, and the specific expression of a person who has just witnessed something that requires action and is already planning what that action will be. Rosalind Madison went through a visible sequence of expressions in approximately 3 seconds. Recognition, the jaw loosening slightly. Relief, the shoulder drop of someone who has been waiting for the most important guest. Performance, the replacement of everything authentic with something polished and urgent. Mr. Kwon. She was moving toward him before the first syllable landed, the microphone still in one hand. You're here. Welcome. Where? Ho-jun did not look at her. He was looking at Lorraine. In the 30 feet between the entrance and the east side of the ballroom floor, he was looking at his wife standing behind a cleaning cart, holding a cloth with 2 security guards still paused in their approach, and he was taking all of it in with the exact expression of someone who is choosing very carefully how they are about to respond to what they have just seen. Rosalind's smile began to shift. Something was wrong. She could feel it without being able to name it. Ho-jun started walking, past the investors near the entrance who straightened up immediately, past the politicians who had been maneuvering toward him since he walked in, past the television camera that had pivoted in his direction, past Rosalind Madison entirely, as though she occupied no meaningful space in the geography of this room, straight across the ballroom floor, to Lorraine. The room had no sound. He stopped in front of her. They looked at each other, an entire private language passing between them in the space of a few seconds. The compressed fluency of people who have spoken to each other, really spoken, for years. His jaw was tight. The muscle just in front of his ear moved once. She gave him the smallest, most precise shake of her head. I'm all right. He heard it. He reached out and took her hand, and then he turned to face the room. My wife, he said. He walked past everyone, past investors, past politicians, past Rosalind Madison holding a microphone, straight to the woman behind the cart, and took her hand. I need to know. Drop it in the comments right now. Did you see that coming? Or did this just rearrange your entire expectation of this story? If you are not subscribed yet, you are making a mistake. Hit that bell right now. Ho-jun delivers the sentence that ends Rosalind's billion-dollar deal in 9 words, and Lorraine finally gets to be fully, publicly, permanently herself. The thing about a room full of powerful people is that they know how to perform composure. They had been trained for it, by boardrooms and courtrooms and press junkets and the 1,000 social negotiations of public life. They knew how to keep their faces arranged while privately recalculating at speed. They knew how to maintain the geometry of a smile, while the internal architecture collapsed and was rebuilt in the same breath. So the ballroom did not erupt. It absorbed. Hundreds of people stood very still and processed the information that the woman they had just watched be publicly humiliated, threatened with removal, called out by name over a microphone in front of a full Gala audience. That woman was the wife of Kwon Ho-jun. The silence lasted perhaps 4 seconds. Then it broke into 100 overlapping sounds at once. Whispered conversations, the soft, rapid percussion of phones being unlocked, the rustle of bodies reorienting toward each other for confirmation. Rosalind Madison stood holding the microphone. She had gone the color of the marble beneath her feet. Wife? The word came out shaped wrong, like something she was still trying to fit into a sentence that made sense. Ho-jun did not look at her. Lorraine Kwon, he said to the room, still calm, each word placed with the precision of someone who understood that language was architecture, that what you built now would stand. My wife. We have been married for 4 years. More sounds from the crowd. A guest near the back said something that might have been impossible and was promptly shushed by the person beside her. Rosalind's hand dropped slowly to her side. The microphone hung from her fingers. Ho-jun finally turned to look at her. It was, Lorraine thought later, the most dangerous she had ever seen him appear. And she had seen him in a great many situations. He had the look of someone who had decided what he was going to do and had no remaining questions about it. Perfectly composed, perfectly cold. The specific expression of a man who had watched everything and was now simply allowing the consequences to arrive. Mr. Kwon, Rosalind began, I want to explain. Ethel, Ho-jun said. 1 word. Ethel Weber, who had been standing at the edge of the room with her tablet, stepped forward. She had the quality of someone who had been waiting for this specific cue for a specific amount of time and had spent that time preparing, rather than hoping. She tapped the tablet screen twice. The giant ballroom display, which had been cycling through charity images and sponsor logos all evening, went dark. And then it filled with security footage, the hotel's own cameras, ceiling-mounted, high-resolution, time-stamped. The room saw itself. The footage began with Lorraine cleaning the east corridor in the early afternoon, Rosalind's arrival. The footage was not cherry-picked or edited. It was simply sequential, hour by hour, showing every interaction that Rosalind Madison had had with hotel staff since she'd arrived that morning. Every exchange, every word spoken at perfectly audible volume. The event coordinator with the wrong shoes, frozen mid-apology, while Rosalind spoke at her from a distance of 18 inches. Terence, event manager of 11 years, pressed against a corridor wall with his hand at his chest. The lighting technician, Chen, standing with his eyes on the floor while a woman who had been in this building for 6 hours told him his professional credentials were insufficient. And then, the ballroom, the wine accident, the cart, Lorraine. The room watched Rosalind cross the floor. They heard themselves go quiet. They heard every word that Rosalind had said through the microphone, now playing back through those same ballroom speakers, in the same room, to many of the same people who had stood silent while it happened. People like you. You don't belong here. Remove her. Nobody laughed this time. A woman in an emerald gown near the third table put her hand over her mouth. A group of investors near the entrance had turned away from the screen as though eye contact with it was incriminating. Politicians who had been angling for photographs with Rosalind since the gala began had quietly repositioned themselves into the crowd. Rosalind was watching the screen, watching herself. Her face had moved through denial and arrived somewhere past it, at the particular destination of someone who understands that the situation is not recoverable and is now only calculating damage. I was under stress, she began. Ho-jun's gaze moved back to her. She stopped. He let the silence run for a full 3 seconds, then 5, then 8. Long enough that the room could feel it. Then he said, I came tonight considering a billion-dollar partnership. His voice was the same temperature it had been since he walked in. Even. Clear. The complete absence of emotion in the delivery somehow made every word heavier. Rosalind's eyes went wide with something that looked briefly, almost like hope. Then he continued. Past tense. The hope went out. The partnership is withdrawn. He didn't look at her again after that. He looked instead at 7 people standing in a loose cluster near the entrance, men and women in the specific posture of people who have made a decision and are waiting for their moment to confirm it publicly. I believe you each have something to say, Ho-jun said. 7 hands went up, one after the other. 7 separate voices, some measured, some clipped, all identical in meaning. Withdrawn. Reconsidering. Unable to proceed. Consulting our advisors. Not at this time. Not at this time. The room watched Rosalind Madison's future rearrange itself in real time. Lorraine stood beside her husband. She had not moved since he took her hand. She was not performing anything. Not vindication. Not satisfaction. Not gracious restraint. She was simply present. Herself. Fully. In the room she had moved through invisibly for 3 years. She felt Ho-jun's thumb move once across the back of her hand. She pressed her fingers against his, once. A full conversation, contained. Rosalind Madison finally looked at her, not the way she had looked at her before, not with the performative contempt of someone establishing hierarchy. With something else. Something closer to the thing that comes when you have run a calculation entirely wrong and the error has just been shown to you, unmistakably, in front of everyone. Lorraine looked back at her. She did not look away first, and she did not say a single word. There was nothing to say. The room had said it. The footage had said it. The 7 raised hands had said it, and the hand of the man beside her closed around hers with a quiet, immovable steadiness. That said the rest. The next 12 hours were a kind of unravelling that moved too fast to look dignified. Rosalind had always been good in a crisis. She knew how to absorb impact, redirect narrative, get the right people on the phone at the right moment. She had survived hostile acquisitions, a regulatory investigation 2 years ago that had seemed fatal and turned out not to be, 3 rounds of board restructuring, and a profile piece in a major financial magazine that had been characterizable as either admiring or damning depending entirely on which paragraph you stopped reading. She had survived those things because in each of those cases she had been dealing with institutions, systems, entities that operated on logic, leverage, and incentive. What happened in the ballroom that night was not a system. It was a room full of people who had witnessed something, recorded it on their phones, and were deciding what it meant before she'd had a chance to shape the story. By 11 that night, the footage, not just Ethel's curated version, but pieces recorded by a dozen guests on their own devices, was circulating on social media. By midnight, it was in the business press. By 2 in the morning, Rosalind's publicist had called 4 times, and she was on the phone with her communications firm discussing what exactly could be walked back and what could not. The honest answer, which nobody said aloud, was that very little of it could be walked back. Because the footage was complete, it was time-stamped and continuous, and it showed exactly what had happened without ambiguity. It showed a woman systematically humiliate everyone around her throughout an entire day, and then, in front of a full gala audience, use a microphone to publicly fire and remove a person whose offence was spilled wine on marble. And it showed who that person turned out to be. The story the press ran with was not complicated. It didn't need to be. In the morning, Lorraine and Ho-jun sat in the living room of their apartment in Tribeca. It was early, barely 7. Light came through the large windows at the east side of the room in long pale rectangles, the kind of early morning light that made everything look provisional and quiet. Lorraine had made coffee. Ho-jun had been on his phone since 5, reading things she hadn't asked about, his expression doing the particular careful work it did when he was processing an external situation that required him to be precise. She sat across from him with her own coffee and waited. He set the phone down eventually. The board at Madison Global met this morning, he said. That was fast. They had already been meeting, he said. Not about last night. Apparently there were existing concerns. Lorraine nodded. This was the part she had never told him, the thing she'd learned through 3 years of invisibility, of moving through spaces where important people forgot to moderate what they said because they didn't believe anyone significant was listening. The complaints about Rosalind Madison inside her own organization were not new. They had existed for at least 2 years. Staff turnover at Madison Global was nearly double the industry rate. There had been at least 3 HR investigations, each of which had been quietly resolved. The ballroom hadn't created Rosalind Madison's problem. It had simply made it undeniable. They're removing her as CEO, Ho-jun said. Lorraine wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "Is that satisfying to hear?" he asked. She thought about it honestly. "No," she said. "Not particularly." He looked at her. "It's the right consequence," she said. "It's just, I don't feel anything good about a person losing everything, even a person who chose to do what she did. There's something sad about someone who has that much and still has to humiliate someone to feel powerful." Ho-jun was quiet for a moment. "You're a more generous person than she deserved last night," he said. "Maybe." She set down her cup. "Or maybe I've just seen enough to know that what she did wasn't really about me." He looked at her for a long time. She met his eyes. "It never is," she said. "People like that are fighting something internal that they've decided to take out on the world. I just happen to be the most convenient target available." "You're not a target," he said. "I know that." She smiled at him, small and real. "I knew that last night too." He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "I should have been there earlier," he said. She shook her head. "You were exactly there when you were needed." "Lorraine." "I handled it," she said quietly. "I handled it by standing there. That was handling it." He looked at her for a long moment. Then, "당신은 내가 아는 누구보다 강합니다." She knew enough Korean now to understand what he'd said. "You are stronger than anyone I have known." She picked up her coffee again. "I know," she said. He laughed, a short, quiet sound that was the private version of him, the one that didn't appear in boardrooms. She loved that laugh more than most things. The sponsors withdrew over the following week in a cascade that was almost architectural in its precision, each one citing the need to review their partnerships in light of recent developments, which was corporate language for "we are not going to be in this photograph." The staff members who had been humiliated throughout the day of the gala were, to Lorraine's knowledge, not publicly discussed as part of the story. They were there in the footage, and people who watched it carefully could see them. But the media narrative was a different geometry. It found the biggest shape and followed it. She thought about Deja, about Terence, who had pressed his hand to his chest in a corridor, and then gone back to work, because going back to work was what you did. She thought about Chen, the lighting technician, who had run the board flawlessly all night despite being told his credentials were insufficient. She made 3 calls. She used her husband's name exactly once, in the first call, to establish that she was serious. Then she made the second and third calls on her own authority. All 3 people, Deja, Terence, Chen, received formal apology letters from the hotel within the week, along with material recognition of their contributions to the event. Lorraine did not take credit. She was not interested in credit. She was interested in the thing being right. She could have watched the empire burn and called it justice. She could have stood back and let the story be about what she was owed. Instead, Lorraine made 3 phone calls, for Deja, for Terence, for Chen, because that is who she is. If this story hit you somewhere real, share it right now with one person who needs to be reminded that quiet strength is still strength. Subscribe and turn on the bell, because the epilogue is where we see Lorraine 6 months later, and what she has built with her own hands for herself, separate from any room, any event, any man, is extraordinary. Don't skip the ending. It's the best part. 6 months later. The space was on the 4th floor of a building in the meatpacking district, which had once been a warehouse and now had the particular quality of light that high ceilings and east-facing windows produce in the morning. Wide, clean, democratic, falling equally on everything. It smelled like fresh paint and coffee and, faintly, sawdust, because the renovation had only been finished for 3 weeks. Lorraine stood in the center of the main room and looked at it. The sign on the door read, "The Lorraine Guan Foundation, Workforce Dignity Initiative." She had gone back and forth on the name for 2 months. Ho-jun had said with characteristic directness, "Use your name. You've spent 3 years making yourself invisible. Use your name." So she had. The foundation had 2 programs. The first, a legal advocacy and documentation service for workers, primarily service industry workers, who experienced workplace harassment or discrimination. The kind of thing that happened every day, in every city, in every industry, but almost never reached formal accountability because the people it happened to couldn't afford the time or the resources or the vulnerability of putting their name to a complaint. The second program was a direct support fund, emergency financial assistance for workers who had been terminated without cause, without notice, without the safety net that most people with real careers took for granted. Lorraine had seeded it herself. She had then spent 4 months building the kind of institutional partnerships that turned a seed into a forest. She had been tireless. She had also been, for the first time in years, publicly herself. The reveal at the Madison Global Gala had ended her ability to remain anonymous. Or rather, it had ended the relevance of anonymity in the way she'd been practicing it, because the thing she'd been protecting herself from, the reduction of her identity to her husband's story, had turned out to be something she could refuse in a different way than she'd imagined. Not by disappearing, by deciding exactly what she was willing to make visible and what remained hers. The foundation was visible. Her legal name on the door, in good plain lettering, was visible. The work was visible. Her private life remained exactly as private as she intended it to be. The day the foundation opened to the public, 3 people arrived who she hadn't expected. The first was Deja. She was wearing her own clothes instead of a uniform, dark jeans, a bright yellow jacket, her hair loose, and she looked like a different version of herself, or maybe the same version with more room. She had left the catering company 2 months ago. She was studying for a paralegal certification. "I heard about the foundation," she said when Lorraine opened the door. "I wanted to see if I could volunteer." Lorraine looked at her for a moment. "Can you come in Tuesday mornings?" she said. Deja smiled. The second was Terence. He came in a week later, in his own time, on a Wednesday afternoon. He wasn't looking for assistance. He had already been offered and accepted a lateral position at a different hotel group, one that had come through a professional contact who had reached out after seeing his name mentioned in a favorable article about the Gala's backstory. He came because, he said, he wanted to see what she was building. He stayed for 2 hours. They talked about design, about the specific challenges of building formal systems for informal harm. He had opinions, good ones, the kind that came from 11 years of watching things go wrong in ways that had no official channel. Before he left, he said, "You didn't have to do what you did. The calls." "I know," Lorraine said. "Why did you?" She thought about it honestly. Because the story that gets told about a night like that one is always the biggest story, the most dramatic shape, and the people who were actually in that room, the ones who bore the most of it, quietly, over an entire day, they don't usually end up in the story at all. Terence nodded. "I wanted them in the story," she said. The third visitor she had not expected was Ethel Weber. Ethel arrived on a Thursday morning with a card from Ho-Jun that said only, "Told you so," which was his extremely abbreviated version of "I knew you would find a way to make this yours." Ethel herself handed Lorraine a printed document. The Guan Technology Solutions Corporate Giving Program, she said. "Mr. Guan is designating the foundation as the primary recipient of the annual civic contribution." Lorraine looked at the number on the document. She looked at Ethel. "He could have mentioned this to me," she said. Ethel smiled, a small, precise smile that Lorraine had learned to read as warmth over the years. "He thought you might argue." "I might have. That's why he sent me." That evening, Ho-Jun came home to find Lorraine sitting at the kitchen counter with the Foundation's first intake files spread in front of her. 47 cases in 3 weeks, which was more than she had projected, and exactly as many as she'd hoped for. He sat down across from her. He didn't say anything. He looked at the files, and then at her, with the expression he had when he was calculating something and didn't need to speak because the calculation was clear. "How many?" he asked. 47 in 3 weeks, she said. He was quiet. "It's going to be more," she said. "The system we've set up for intake, there are barriers. People are afraid to put their names to things. We need a parallel anonymous reporting track that still connects to formal support." "Who's designing it?" "I am," she said, "with a tech contractor. I was going to ask if you knew anyone." He smiled. "I might know someone," he said. She went back to the file she'd been reading. He watched her work for a moment. Then, "You know what the press is calling you." She had seen it. She'd chosen not to engage with it, which was still the correct choice, but she'd seen it. The invisible wife who owned the room. "Reductive," she said. "Accurate," he said. She looked up at him. "I didn't own the room," she said. "I was in the room. I was always in the room. I was in thousands of rooms. That's different." "Explain the difference," he said, because this was how they had always worked, the two of them. She would say a true thing, and he would ask her to name why it was true. "Owning something implies it was ever in question," she said. "The room wasn't what I was after. I was just there." Being myself. That was enough. He looked at her for a long time. "당신은 변한 게 없어," he said softly. "You haven't changed at all." "Good," she said, and went back to her files. Outside, the city moved through its ordinary evening hours, taxis and foot traffic, and the particular amber quality of streetlights on glass. Inside, the files on the counter represented 47 people. 47 specific human beings who had been in their own rooms, offices, hotel kitchens, construction sites, hospital corridors, being themselves, doing their work, and encountering the particular cruelty of people who had decided that a uniform was a verdict. Lorraine Guan had once been invisible because she chose it. Now she was visible because she chose that too. That was the thing nobody wrote about, in all the articles and social media threads and business news segments that had followed the gala night. They wrote about the reveal, the footage, the 7 investors, the billion-dollar partnership withdrawn in 9 words. They wrote about Rosalind Madison's removal from her own company. They wrote about Ho-jun's loyalty and his composure and his arrival. They wrote about the drama of it, the shape of it. Nobody wrote about the 40 seconds. The 40 seconds it had taken Lorraine to blot a spill on marble while someone pointed a microphone at her. She had known, in those 40 seconds, exactly who she was. She had not needed anyone to tell her. She had not needed rescue. She had not needed the reveal, or the footage, or the 7 hands, or her husband's voice from the doorway. Though all of those things were real and true, and she was grateful for every one of them. She had needed only what she had always had, the knowledge that a uniform tells you what someone does, and she had always known what she was doing. If you were Lorraine, would you have revealed your identity the moment Rosalind pointed that microphone, or would you have let the room figure it out on its own? Drop your answer in the comments, and if this story moved you, share it with one person tonight who needs to be reminded that being seen and being powerful are not the same thing. Subscribe. Hit the bell. She is not done.